we need to reframe the way we approach poverty and safety net discussions to say the goal is to have as many American families as possible achieve work-based self-reliance. Now, how do we get there?
Hello. Welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a lot about safety nets, about welfare cliffs, about a number of different things to try to get people back to work and try to provide more prosperity and not be trapped into the hammock of poverty in many cases. And it's none other than Nic Dunn. Nick, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Hey, Vance. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I was recently on your podcast, and so we were like, hey, we need to have some other discussions. And what's the name of your podcast again for the audience?
Yeah, ours is Defending Ideas here at Sutherland Institute.
Yes. And so I'll make sure to put that in the show notes page as well. Doing a lot of great work there at Sutherland. But before we jump into this, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Nic Dunn serves as Vice President of Strategy and Senior Fellow at the Sutherland Institute in Utah. As VP of Strategy, Nick oversees the execution and strategic external impact of Sutherland's written and multimedia policy content. In his capacity as Senior Fellow, he leads the policy research, coalition building, and public advocacy for policies that strengthen opportunity and upward mobility. This policy focus includes social safety net reform, workforce issues, and support for the well-being of men and boys. Prior to Sutherland, Nick served as Director of Utah's Community Builders, the Salt Lake Chamber's nonprofit Social Impact Foundation. Nick is also a co-chair of the Salt Lake County Intergenerational Poverty Task Force. That's a mouthful. Nick has a master's degree in public policy from the University of Utah and a dual bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism and political science from the University of Nevada, Reno. Nick and his family live in Eagle Mountain, Utah. All right, Nick. So with all that great background and everything else going on, let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
The simple answer is because I feel like I have been given a very blessed life in my time on Earth so far, and I feel like I have a responsibility to try and use what I've been given to try and bless the lives of others. I mean, especially when we talk about issues like poverty and upward mobility, a lot of folks who are in what I would call the opportunity movement have kind of unique, powerful stories of their experiences. I was on a separate podcast, actually, the State Policy Network's Neighbors in the Network podcast, and one of their hosts was talking about their own experience kind of when they were younger, living and experiencing poverty. And the reason I mention all that is I don't have that kind of lived experience. You know, I've never really experienced poverty. And again, I of course I'm fortunate. I feel blessed for that fact. But I also feel that if I don't try to, again, use this blessing that I've been given of the life that I have to try and make a difference for others, it's kind of like I'm wasting it. Very much feel motivated by my faith. Yeah. And this compulsion to try and help others. And also I think it's just, it's fun to try and solve problems. Yeah. That's why I love the public policy world, is we get to identify problems and challenges that people face in Utah and other states around the country, and try and find interesting ways to fix them. And so it's really meaningful work that I very much feel called to, doing what I can during my vocation, my time here on the earth, to try and make it so that others are more able to reach out and grab hold of the American dream, that they're more able to create the kind of life for themselves and their kids that they want. And it's incredibly fun and fulfilling work. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it, Nick. And it shows in all the work that you do and have done in the past and everything else. And because we've known each other for a number of years now. And I still remember us chatting and talking about, empowerment accounts or safety nets or just a whole bunch of other things over the years. And your dedication to what seems like your calling is certainly apparent in many ways. And so I really appreciate all the work you're doing in Utah and other places. And it's nice that you're in Utah, because Utah has kind of been leading the way in a lot of these safety net reforms over the years that I want to get into in a little bit. But I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more. Like, how did you kind of get to this worldview? I mean, is this something that maybe you got from your parents, or was it something you learned in college, or was it or maybe talking to some of your friends growing up? Like, how did you get to this place where you're at today? It's a great question. And I think a good way to think of it is in terms of sort of anchoring experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I look at my background and upbringing, there are a couple things that really stand out as far as anchoring experiences. One of those, really importantly, was when I was finishing my undergraduate work in Nevada and moved out to Utah to pursue grad school. I started working for the governor at the time of Utah, Gary Herbert, as his speechwriter, and being kind of able to jump into the world of state level governance and policy. And as a speechwriter, you have a lot of one-on-one time with your principal, in this case, the governor, because you have to really understand their perspective, their philosophy. The goal of a good speechwriter is to get to the point where you would put something down on paper that's exactly what they would say or they would write. You're just kind of helping to channel those ideas. So speechwriting is a very fun job.
Yeah.
But a lot of that one-on-one time with our governor at the time, and sort of seeing all of these conversations around various issues the state was dealing with back then and how the government was responding, it was an anchoring experience for me because it was really the first time that I had seen sort of principled and pragmatic conservatism actually deployed, and seeing it firsthand from the state level here in Utah, and seeing, well, this stuff actually really works. Like Utah, across a number of rankings, does really, really well. We can maybe go down the list later in some of those areas, but Utah, just seeing those ideas put into practice and seeing them done effectively, and seeing sort of the fruits of that work in the state of Utah really stood out to me as this stuff really does work. It really does make a difference for folks being pro-free enterprise and limited government, trying to manage government well, and those kinds of things. So that was one important experience. A couple others were when I was working for the state at a time when I was working for the Utah Department of Workforce Services, and through the course of my work, I interacted with a man who was formerly homeless, because the state has does a lot to try and address homelessness here in Utah. And interacting with this man, I asked him at one point, just out of curiosity, I said, "What do you think would be helpful to you? Folks like you, or folks who are in your similar shoes in the recent past, what do you want to see more of? What do you need from?" And I was honestly expecting him to say things like, well, more generous government programs or provide these kinds of things. But what he said floored me. He said, "I just want a hand up, not a hand out."
Yeah.
And I hadn't coached him at that point to say anything like that. He was just articulating that I want to work.
Yeah.
I want to earn my way up and out of poverty. And that's always stuck with me, because it totally shifted the lens from, it's not just about what can government policy do to provide things to people to alleviate material suffering, which there is a role for that. But if we're not connecting it to earned success and work, then we're missing the real point of these kinds of things. So that was a hugely anchoring experience for me. And then the third one is Arthur Brooks wrote the book, The Conservative Heart, which came out, I think, in 2015 or so.
Yeah.
When I read that, I remember thinking, this is what I've been looking for. This is kind of the guidebook for principled conservatives who want to address poverty and create more opportunity and upward mobility. And it was really impactful to see those ideas articulated in such a way that I thought, great, I can take this and run with it. So those experiences together have really helped to form, again, this view of opportunity and upward mobility that I think is really central to the American dream. It's central to the promise of America. I think can be boiled down to really two things. It's freedom and opportunity. We're going to secure your constitutionally protected rights through our system of governance and our constitutional order. And we're going to create an environment where you have the opportunity to earn your own success and create a better life for yourself. And those principles, I think, are at the heart of the American idea and the principles we need to continue to fight for today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where do you think that, given your time and given talking to folks and doing policy research and everything else that you've been doing for a number of years now, where do you think we're making the most strides, and where are some of the biggest challenges that we're still facing?
I think some of the biggest areas of progress we've made would be in alleviating material suffering.
Yeah.
On our Defending Ideas podcast here at Sutherland, we recently had Kevin Corinth on the show. He's great.
Yeah.
He's a scholar over at AEI, and he's deputy director for their Center on Opportunity and Social Mobility.
Kevin also worked at CEA, at Council of Economic Advisors in the White House whenever I was there at OMB. So we got to know each other well then. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. And he did a great job of articulating, he knows the data far better than I do, but articulating when you really account for the various government programs that have come online, in the last half century or so, especially since the 60s and the launch of the war on poverty.
Yeah.
When you account for those, there really has been a significant decline in the number of American families facing true material deprivation.
Yeah.
And so I think we should look at that as a success of the modern safety net. That of course we don't want any kids to go hungry or to have unstable housing or any of those kinds of things. We're a wealthy nation. We should be very grateful for the blessing of the free enterprise system that has made it possible to have a safety net, and recognize when we have made progress and, again, alleviating material suffering for our fellow Americans. So that is a significant step forward. And I think the data, as folks like Kevin articulate well, can show that. Where I think we still need to make some progress is in true upward mobility, meaning that a safety net that simply provides for immediate material needs is just one sort of side of the coin. That's great if it's viewed as this is temporary until you get back on your feet, and we're going to help you get back on your feet so you can move into what I would call work-based self-reliance.
Yeah.
And I think just the way we talk about safety net issues, the way we talk about poverty in this country, sometimes from both sides of the political aisle, but you just watch the debates that happen in Washington.
Yeah.
Too often, our policy debates on upward mobility treat poverty as if it's solely a question of, do you have the resources you need to cover your material needs or not? That's not really the correct, in my view, articulation of poverty. It's, are you able to earn enough to become self-sufficient? And so I think that's an area where there's still a lot of work to do, that we need to make sure whatever our government interventions are to help people struggling to escape poverty are really trying to turn it into more of a launch pad to success. And we need to get away from the idea of, if we have sort of just given resources to families, we have lifted them out of poverty. You see some of this language around things like tax credits, and even during and after COVID, the debate around the child tax credit that was expanded. Sometimes people will say, well, hey, when we expanded these various government transfer programs in the form of tax credits, look at all the poverty we reduced by lifting families out of poverty. The analogy that I use is that if you or I had a friend who came to us and said, hey, I'm down on my luck. I don't have a job right now. I just need some help. And if you or I said, great, you can sleep on my couch or sleep in my basement for a while. Don't worry about paying rent. Eat food out of the fridge. I can help you with some expenses. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Would we then go and say, hey, my friend is no longer in poverty. I solved poverty for him. No, that would be silly.
Yeah.
What we would say is, I'm helping them out temporarily. That's a very kind Christian thing to do.
Yeah.
But obviously I want them to find work and get back on their feet and be self-sufficient. For some reason, we talk about government programs only in the first lens. We need to talk more about true self-sufficiency.
Yes. Yeah, definitely agree. No, those are great points. And I tend to agree with you too. Like, there has been a lot of success in the sense of, I think Kevin and others, Bruce Meyer, who have been in this space for a while, working in this space, they'll show that, income, when you think about poverty based on income thresholds, it's still relatively high. Maybe it's kind of flatlined for a while, even though we've thrown trillions of dollars at the problem. But the consumption-based poverty, how much people can actually consume, that poverty has went down dramatically. And in particular, it's been the lower income levels that have improved their amount of consumption dramatically compared to upper income. And in other words, we can all own a car, we can all own a iPhone, or I say all, most people can own these things. And that's dramatically improved compared to where we were. However, there's a huge cost, and the cost has meant we've run up massive deficits and debt for the country, and higher interest rates and inflation. And, nothing is free, as Milton Friedman would always say, right? Nothing's free. There's going to be a cost. But then what are the overall benefits that we can see? And I think, going to your point about kind of earned success or work, I like the way you put it, work towards self-sufficiency. I think that's really good, is this idea of work has almost become a bad four-letter word. Four-letter word, Nick, where especially the younger generations are taking longer to go to work. There's less incentive maybe for them to want to work. There's more talk about living wages and all these other things where they want to put on government versus themselves and saying, okay, this is a step in the direction that I want to go. There's also been this kind of talk about, getting a college degree. That's been pushed for so long. It basically is K through 12 is a pipeline to college degree. But there are a lot of other degrees and other and technical skills that are needed across the country and that actually pay really well. And I think maybe this mentality of not working, not having that dignity and respect that goes along with work has created a situation across America where we have labor shortages. We have many people who have dropped out of the labor force, where the labor force participation rate isn't quite back up to where it was previously. And there's the 25 to 54-year-old that it's actually pretty high now. But we had a lot of people between 16 and 24 either drop out or can't find a job because minimum wages are higher or whatever the reason may be, or maybe they're just waiting until longer to work. And then we also have over 55 who, especially after COVID, decided, you know what, it's not worth it anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and retire. So we had a lot of brain drain happen across the spectrum. And I know with your research of looking at men and boys and things of that nature, how do you kind of fit some of these pieces in? Because to me, that's contributed not only to the lack of income mobility, but some to the breakdown of the family. And how do we start thinking about some of those things?
Well, there's definitely a correlation between work and work rates and poverty and upward mobility. And even just looking at, you mentioned the labor force participation rate, even just looking at the work rates, one of the things that people often say is that, well, if you're talking about welfare reform or safety net, they point to, well, a lot of or most of these families are already working. But then when you dig in a little further into some of the data, there is more instability in attachment to the labor force, just generally speaking, in kind of lower income demographics. And as you mentioned, again, the concern around labor force participation, again, just the rate of folks who are work eligible, working age, who are working, being lower than it has in the past, and in some ways maybe lower than it should be.
Yeah.
What one of the biggest factors is that for individuals or for families for whom there is full-time year-round work, that has a significant effect. There's a strong correlation between that and lower poverty rates. And so I think that we have to recognize, and anytime we get into these conversations about what's the path out of poverty, there is no true path out of poverty that doesn't involve sustained engagement with work for an individual, for a household in some form. And I think that's just a fundamental principle we need to articulate better and more often, that work is essential. It is central to any path of upward mobility. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that too, when you mentioned the dignity of work, far too many people, and again, I think on both sides of the political aisle, sometimes articulate work as a bad thing, as a punishment. Some folks might say, well, we're forcing, low-income families to work, and that's punitive in some way, especially in the context of discussions around work requirements. Yeah. And at times, even folks on the right will say that, well, if you're getting government benefits, then you better be working for it. Instead, we should be saying work is a blessing. And because the data shows overwhelmingly the connection with, again, sustained engagement with work and lower poverty rates and upward mobility, and just mental and emotional health and a sense of dignity. The Georgia Center for Opportunity has done some great research on kind of the non-financial benefits of work. And all those things should be part of the conversation. That, again, we need to reframe the way we approach poverty and safety net discussions to say the goal is to have as many American families as possible achieve work-based self-reliance. Mm-hmm. Now, how do we get there? Mm-hmm. And then we kind of have that North Star to point towards. But that means people on both sides need to stop talking about work as something that's punitive and instead recognize that it is fundamentally a good thing. And Arthur Brooks, again, in his book, The Conservative Heart, which, as I've said, is a big inspiration to me and my work ever since that book came out, continues to be, that all work is dignified. Mm-hmm. That anytime someone is working kind of an honest job to create value and draw a paycheck, there's something fundamentally dignified about that. And we need to stop talking about work in kind of these negative terms.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's almost like, in some sense, not to get too political about it, but the left kind of hijacked work as being a bad thing. And I think maybe some on the right have tried to use some of that language to adhere, to try to get people to listen, but maybe has steered too far in this and against work. And I've also had David Bonson on, who wrote Full-Time Work, and we had a great conversation about this. Georgia Center for Opportunity does a lot of great work. There's the Alliance for Opportunity, which Sutherland Institute is a part of now, which is also the Pelican Institute in Louisiana, and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and some others now. And so it's interesting too to see, Nick, about in our system of federalism, which is, I think, one of the best parts of America and our founding was having the system of federalism, is it allows for laboratories of competition among the states. And one of the great things, and you brought this up earlier, is what Utah has done. And so I was just looking at some of the numbers, and this is actually on a website that I've kind of put together for Americans for Tax Reform, but it's a state budget project. And you can go through each state, and it shows you how states are doing as far as their budget goes, like spending. But also there's like a list of about 50 different rankings and economic and fiscal criteria. And so Utah ranked number 1 in real private GDP growth. So excluding government, just private GDP from 2014 to 2023. That's huge, right? Also, the labor force participation rate of 68.5%. And this was December 2023, so there needs some updates here, but they ranked 4th, and they're still doing really well. Official poverty rate, 6.7% was a 3-year average from 21 to 23. That ranked number 1, meaning the best, like the lowest poverty rate. And so, and even American Exchange Council, ALEC, they showed that economic performance ranked 3rd from 2012 to 22, and their economic outlook ranking is number 1. And they just had a new report come out, I think yesterday when we were recording this, that still shows number 1. And I think a lot of that has to do with this whole thing you've been talking about, Nick, about the dignity of work. And for me, I kind of go back to one of God's first commandments to us: be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful. And so there was a component of us to work. It would be great not to be able to work and just sit back and relax all day and eat bonbons and do whatever we want to do, sit out at the beach. And part of that is the leisure that we can get from work. But there's still something that comes with that capacity. I think that's that it's innate in us to work. And the more and more that we have policies that get in the way, and I think we could even go further back to like the New Deal and FDR and a lot of the bigger government programs that came out, there was more disincentive to work. But what I'm finding so interesting, and this is why I love the work that you're doing, Nick, is that in the States, there have been a lot of good opportunities. And one of the big parts of this is the welfare cliffs. You've got a recent paper that you've authored on benefits cliffs. And basically, looking at if when your income goes up, you lose some of that income, like you mentioned earlier. Why do you think that's such a big issue? And what are some ways that we could deal with it?
Well, I think a good way to think about the benefits cliffs issue or disincentives to work in the safety net is by starting with this broad kind of moral principle. And I would articulate it this way, that if I work harder and earn more, my kids should be better off, which is a fundamental truth. And it's worth, I'll repeat it, that if I work harder and earn more, my family should be better off. And the problem of things like benefits cliffs, this kind of disincentive or even a perceived disincentive in the safety net, is it makes that principle not true, or at the very least, some families don't feel that it's true. And so the fact that if there are families out there, if I felt that way, that me working harder and earning more could actually make my wife and kids worse off, or at the very least kind of stuck in the same place, that'd be incredibly debilitating. That'd be very, very hard to deal with. And so on a moral level, it's wrong that there are families that are feeling this way, that are experiencing this. And so again, it goes back to that kind of broad principle of we want as many families as possible to achieve work-based self-reliance. And the very system that we have in this country that's designed to help families who are struggling, if it sometimes doesn't feel like it's well calibrated towards that goal, toward those broad principles, then that's a problem that we can fix. When you start to get into the practical level, and again, this idea of a benefit cliff is just that a relatively small increase in your household earned income can trigger a larger decrease from one or multiple benefit programs that the household may be on. And so essentially, if you earn a little bit more, you lose a lot more from the reduction in benefits, and kind of you realize, well, wait a minute, my wage went up, but my overall household financial circumstance is actually worse off now as a result.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, sometimes there's a treadmill effect or it cancels out enough of it that for some folks, it kind of feels like just working harder doesn't actually pay off. And so there's one really important question in this is, how often is this driven by sort of a full and accurate understanding of what happens to your benefit programs as your income increases versus how often is it driven by maybe a perception that may not be totally accurate? And we need to acknowledge both of those things as fair questions of kind of what's the ratio. But the bigger question to me has been, we've been talking about benefits cliffs for years. There have been anecdotes. This was actually a big part of the discussion in the 1990s with the welfare reform back then. But and there's great modeling data. Again, the Georgia Center for Opportunity has a benefit cliff calculator, really amazing tool to help to visualize where some of these cliffs can occur. But one of the questions that kept on coming up as we started to get into this issue here at Sutherland Institute and here in Utah more broadly was, okay, we get that there are some anecdotes. We get that there is some modeling data that this could be an area of concern. But is it really actually influencing anything? Is it really actually constraining the economic prospects for these families? So here at Sutherland, what we decided to do was to commission a statewide public opinion survey of families who are on the safety net or recently were on the safety net to really just try and find out, is this actually affecting economic behavior? Are there actually families who are turning down opportunities because they're worried about this? And what we found was that there was. According to our survey research, 43% of respondents said that at some point they had turned down an economic opportunity of some kind because they were worried about triggering a benefit cliff or benefit plateau. So 43% said, yeah, I've said no to something at some point. And some of the most common things that happen when people have that experience, the most common one, which is kind of surprising to me, 29% of the respondents said that they had just stopped pursuing opportunities. They stopped looking for new job opportunities or opportunities to grow their income. And again, I attribute that to kind of this plateau or disincentive effect of folks maybe thinking, why should I try? Why should I pursue when I don't think even if I got the opportunity, it would actually make me better off? So that's the fact that almost a third feel kind of stifled in that way is concerning. Other things, folks might turn down job opportunities that are offered to them. That showed up in our survey data as well. In other instances, they might turn down additional hours. We actually had a woman in our podcast studio on an episode of Defending Ideas who was receiving food stamps, a single mom here in Utah, working hard, trying to earn more money and provide a better life for her kids. And she shared that when she was on food stamps, she was intentionally limiting the number of clients she was taking and the number of hours she was working. She could have worked more hours just because she was trying to not trigger a benefit cliff or plateau in the food stamp area of her household income. So these are just some of the examples where, again, we have now in robust survey data, it's statewide, it's largely families who are current or very recent participants in the safety net here in Utah. And again, that 43% number keeps on standing out to me that's a big number of folks who have, again, what we call in the paper, engaged in an intentional earnings reduction to constrain that because, again, they're acting rationally. They're trying to create financial stability for their families. And so that's one of the things that we saw that and we said, well, this is something we actually think we can fix here in Utah.
Yeah. And what are some of those recommendations then? Because, that is a major problem and it's unfortunate. I guess there is an argument that says, well, if people are getting more income, then they shouldn't get the benefits, right? And because you want to keep incentivizing them to work. But I think to your point, and the research is pretty clear on this, is that, but the benefit cuts are more so than the income that they're gaining. And so on net, to your point, they don't feel any better off. And so there's more incentive to not work. So how can we start to smooth out some of those benefits cliffs that are there?
Yeah, so our paper has a number of recommendations, both at the state and federal level. And I think from the outset, it's important to recognize that ultimately, the bulk of this reform needs to happen at the federal level in some form. And the reason I say that is because these programs, for the most part, they're federally funded. There are federal requirements. So this is actually an example of public policy where, to your point earlier about states being the laboratories of competition, there is not enough ability of states to actually innovate and be true laboratories of competition in the safety net and welfare reform space, because these things are sort of dictated by the federal government in many respects. There are some areas where states have some flexibility, but by and large, to truly fix this problem at the core of it, there need to be some reforms from the federal government, or at the very least, the federal government giving additional flexibility to states. So that's one of the concrete recommendations. Is that, I don't necessarily expect our good friends in Congress and in Washington, D.C. to be able to fix this problem anytime soon. Things are slow. There's politics. It's complicated back there.
Yeah.
Of course, we're always pushing for that. But I have actually more hope and optimism in states and state legislatures and governors and agency administrators, if they're given a little bit of flexibility to truly be innovative and think outside the box. I think that can do some significant good. So one of our recommendations is that the federal government should look for opportunities to empower states to engage in more innovative pilot programs to test different ways to help transition folks off of government programs into work-based self-reliance. And that could look like states getting waivers to taper down benefits differently, so work is always incentivized.
Yeah.
It could look like more block grants within certain parameters, giving states some flexibility. And just otherwise, just essentially empowering states to be creative, to be innovative. I think that would go a long, long way. There are also some things that could be done at the federal level in terms of how they structure things, how state agencies report to the federal government on these programs. And on the state level, one thing we're actually doing now here in Utah, in our most recent legislative session that just concluded, we here at Sutherland worked very closely with governor's office, with workforce services, with legislators, but we were able to secure a legislative appropriation of $6 million in TANF funding, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families block grant, to launch a pilot program here in Utah to try and address this, to fix these issues. And the Utah pilot program, it's all about financial planning and navigation. What it's doing is, number one, it's going to provide participants with some kind of financial planning tool or resource so that they can better plan and forecast and know with accuracy and precision, if I take this raise, what happens to my benefits? Because right now, often they're making decisions, sometimes in absence of information, sometimes out of fear or concern. And if they had a clear and accurate picture of what actually happens to my household finances overall as my earned income goes up, that's going to eliminate some information gaps and help them to just make more informed decisions. The second component of the pilot is enhanced kind of community-based mentoring and coaching. There are ongoing efforts that already exist like that really kind of leveraging the civic fabric, the social capital of Utah, to help these families navigate, again, this transition from welfare programs to work-based self-reliance. So those two interventions we think will be really meaningful to help. The goal is to help these families feel more empowered to say yes to economic opportunities. And to the extent that it uncovers where there is, in administrative data, true structural cliffs that create a material disincentive, there's robust data capturing built into the pilot program. So we can identify, okay, here's where we need some structural reforms in the future to smooth out some of these cliffs. So that's something that, again, it just got appropriated, got funded. We're moving forward with that right now here in Utah.
No, that's exciting. That's exciting. I look forward to seeing how that goes. And I think you're right. I think the block grants would be a great step in the right direction for a lot of ways, whether it be Medicaid and getting away from the FMAP sort of situation that incentivizes more spending at the state level to bring down more federal funds, which still comes out of taxpayers' pockets, just depends on which pocket. But allowing for more flexibility of the states to do different pilot projects. To your point there, you and I have also talked about this idea of empowerment accounts, where we can streamline a lot of these different safety net programs kind of into one, allowing for some of the financial tools, allowing for like the success sequence of, you want to graduate from high school, get a full-time job, get married before you have kids, that 97% chance of not being in poverty. I mean, those are the sort of things I think people should be more aware of, to your point about sharing more information and putting more agency with them allowing them to move up the income ladder and hopefully out of poverty forever. Because one of the things that we've seen is that people get off these programs, like they'll hit the benefits cliff and then they'll get off the program, and then pretty quickly thereafter, because they haven't really changed their knowledge, they haven't changed any of their other habits, they fall back into poverty pretty quickly. And so you see this kind of rollover effect that tends to happen. And I think by moving to a community-based system, kind of like what your pilot's talking about there, and allowing for our financial tools to help them understand more of their financial situation, I think those would be great steps in the right direction. And in doing it in a fiscally conservative way. Like you said, some of this was already TANF money that was going to the pilot project. So it's not like it's growing the overall budget from that perspective either. So I think these are great ideas that hopefully will get legs in Utah where you're at, or Texas where I'm at, and a number of other states, because many people are still suffering. Like going full circle here, what we were talking about earlier is, yes, material things people can still get, but are they really living their fullest life based on work and dignity and respect for their family, of not living on poverty, not living in poverty, or a generational poverty, which can be a big problem, and things of that nature. And I think, kind of as we're closing up here, you also had a piece recently in the Washington Examiner talking about Republicans address welfare's work disincentives within the budget reconciliation and other things that they're going to be working on now. There's a framework for the reconciliation of what they can do, but now they're going to start looking at more of the details. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to express some of those thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I think it's always helpful to tie these back to the ongoing conversations happening in Washington, D.C., because it makes it immediate and relevant.
Yeah.
Because there is real opportunity right now through the reconciliation process to make some important reforms at the federal level that can both significantly and substantively improve things federally, while also empowering states to be more innovative, which in turn allows us to empower these families.
Yeah.
And so one kind of broad point with what you're asking about, that again goes back to what I would describe as, I would offer this as a critique of the perspective of, well, we just need to enhance the amount of resources going to families to lift them out of poverty. Again, when I've sat down face to face with these families and talked to them, or when we talk to them through our survey data or focus groups, there is no one that I have encountered who's trying to escape poverty that wants or is okay with staying on government welfare programs long term. Mm-hmm. They may exist. I've never talked to one of them.
Yeah.
But by and large, they want to work, they want to get out of poverty, and they want to be self-reliant. They don't want to have to rely on these government programs anymore. Yeah. Which is why, again, we have to shift the conversation to how do we help this be a springboard for people to get off of these programs into work-based self-reliance. And so that's just on the human level. Yeah. We have to be thinking of things in those terms. And how that translates to what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now, there are, in this Washington Examiner piece, I co-authored with Josh Bandock, who's the head of policy at Illinois Policy Institute, another great state-based policy organization that we work with.
Yeah,
and Josh
he's also a former guest.
Well.
He's a former guest on the show.
That's right. Yeah, he's been on our show. Good. So another great champion and leader in, again, what I would call the opportunity movement, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But Josh and I in this piece, we articulate some of these problems with benefits cliffs in the context of work requirements, because there are a number of different proposals floating around in Congress right now to add or strengthen in some way work requirements for some of these programs like food stamps, Medicaid, housing, those kinds of things. So basically what we argue is that, hey, congressional Republicans and congressional leadership, if you're going to address work requirements, you also need to address the other side of the coin, which is work disincentives in the form of benefits cliffs. Because if there is a goal to try and incentivize work more in the safety net, which broadly speaking, in principle, I think is a great thing.
Yeah.
Yes, we need to incentivize work and help people move in that direction for all the reasons we've already articulated. But the other side of that coin is that we need to remove the barriers in their path. Because again, by and large, in my experience and in our research, in our conversations, families want to work. So they already have this incentive to move towards work, but they're facing these disincentives that are just unintended consequences of the way these programs are structured.
Yeah.
So what we don't want to do is push people towards work more while leaving the work disincentives in place. So then they're kind of getting squeezed or sort of shoved over a cliff, to use that metaphor.
Yeah.
We want to clear their path. So let's empower them with work. Let's address and remove work disincentives. Some of the things we propose on the federal level are, number one, you could incorporate, again, financial planning and forecasting resources by default throughout the safety net. That could be something the federal government could look at to, again, allow these families to engage in true planning, financial planning and forecasting, to make better informed decisions and feel empowered rather than feel uncertain.
Yeah.
The second thing is to look at ways to coordinate what some folks call phase outs or the taper down of these programs. That essentially, looking at it this way, for a given household on these federal programs, for every dollar you earn additionally in your earned income, applied to all of your benefits in aggregate, you should keep enough of that dollar after your various programs have been reduced so that it still feels like work pays, that you were incentivized to work. Coordinating those phase outs in a way that's consistent and that, again, always incentivizes work is an important step that they could do. And then the third one is, again, going back to empowering states to be more innovative with waiver approvals or block grants or those kinds of things, because I really believe that some of the best ideas will come from states like Utah and Texas and Illinois and Georgia and just other folks at the state level trying to be innovative. All of this should be within fiscally responsible parameters.
Sure.
And pro work.
Yeah.
So the reforms need to be in those lenses.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's fantastic. And given the situation we are in at the federal level, in particular with the budget, that's always really important of thinking about. And look, I mean, at the end of the day, I remember when I was in the White House and doing some projections about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act or what the president wanted to do in different areas of the budget. We did have pro-growth policies that were allowing for more economic growth that would help with our budget window, like the revenue forecast. But I would always make the case, too, that when you have a more robust economy and more people are working, you also have a cut in cost in welfare payments or in benefits and things of that nature. You don't need as much. So there's also a fiscally conservative argument I would make. And as you know, I'm a big fiscal hawk and talk about spending limits and all that fun stuff all the time. That this can also help us with our fiscal situation, which helps us with the budgeting for families. To where you can have more, like to your point about planning, you can know what the horizon is going to be more like without huge swings in taxes and other things. And it allows for us to have what I would consider a more robust economy with more job opportunities for people to meet whatever areas of the economy they want to go into. They're not stuck just in one career, but they can be in multiple careers or think about other things throughout the over time. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of free market capitalism, where you can allow for these things to happen. There's going to be limited roles for government, but let's make sure that the roles for government that they're doing are actually helpful and not hurtful as benefit cliffs and other things. And one of the other areas that I think we should probably look into more, Nick, is instead of doing like benefits cliffs, so if you gain a little more income, you lose some of your benefits, is maybe start doing it more in time, like time horizons. So you have a certain amount of time you could be on this program to where you wouldn't need to worry about the amount of income until you go up for eligibility again. That would also help to smooth out, I think, some of those transitions. So no, this is all great stuff, and you're doing a lot of great work, Nick. And to wrap up here, what would you like to leave us with? As far as some challenges, things you're excited about, how we could be more prosperous, or anything else you'd like to leave us with today. And be sure to tell us where best to find you as well.
Yeah, well, as far as kind of what to leave us with, I think all of us who, whether we consider ourselves conservatives or fiscal conservatives, or I've been using the term part of the opportunity movement, and maybe that's a broader term, but I guess anyone out there listening or watching this who thinks, I want America to still be the land of opportunity, and I want opportunity to be stronger. I want the American dream to be stronger. I want more and more of my fellow Americans to feel like their hard work pays off and that they can achieve the American dream, that they can work their way up and out of poverty and into the middle class and upward to create the kind of life that is going to be great for especially their kids. I think so much about parents who are trying to work harder for their kids. Anyone who hears that and says, yes, that's me. Like I'm part of that. Count me in as part of the opportunity movement. I think every single one of us need to be really cognizant of the way we talk about public policy interventions in the realm of poverty. That everything we say, everything we hear about, every proposal we hear about on the news, or every interaction we have with an elected official, we should always be asking the question, is this moving more Americans towards work-based self-reliance or not?
Yeah.
And is it doing so in a fiscally responsible way, in a pro-work way? Like that should always be our goal.
Yeah.
And so every conversation we're in this should be, my goal is work-based self-reliance for as many Americans as possible. And that's going to bring more and more people into the fold to have this consensus conversation, because now we're just discussing how to get there.
Right.
And that North Star is really vital.
Yeah.
And lastly, I mean, our work continues. We have on our website, sutherlandinstitute.org, there's under our issues tab, our work and opportunity initiative kind of catalogs all of this work that we're doing.
Good.
And then, of course, defendingideas.org for our podcast. Would love to continue the work with anyone out there who's excited about this as we are.
Yeah, I love it, Nick, and you're doing a great job. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on these things and many more over the years. And thank you for all you're doing. God bless you and your family. And I hope to have you on again soon.
Thanks so much, Vance. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nick. And for the audience, thank you for joining us today. Be sure to share this with your friends and family and others, coworkers and everyone else, because they too need to learn more about poverty, what we can do about it, how to overcome it, the benefits of work, and the dignity and respect that it brings. These are all so important because we want people to prosper and to be better off overall. So thank you for joining me today. God bless you, and let people prosper.